They did not have to wait long. Just before sunrise, the alarms went off every scanner. Every light flashing red, the sky above the station darkened as shadows moved through the trees. The enemy had come in numbers more than before, smarter, faster. They wanted their wounded back, or they wanted revenge. Mark grabbed his rifle and took position. The others spread out and braced for impact. And then it began. The trees exploded inward as the first wave hit. Claws flashing, armor gleaming, eyes glowing blue, and the Mark stepped off the ramp of the dropship, and his boots sank slightly into the damp soil of Taros 9. The jungle around him felt like it was breathing. The air was thick and heavy with a scent he could not place, a mix of burned leaves and something metallic. The sky above was tinted green from the dense canopy, and every movement felt. Watch the squad behind him scan the area, their rifles raised. But even the machines seemed nervous. The trees were enormous with thick vines that twisted like living snakes, and the sounds of creatures echoed from all directions. Captain Roan gave a silent signal, and the team moved into the forest. Their objective was simple: investigate the loss of 3 previous expeditions and establish a forward base. But nothing about this mission felt simple. Mark was the youngest in the group, just promoted from ground technician to field scout. He had trained for this, but training could not prepare someone for the weight of silence that wrapped around them like a shroud. They found the first sign of trouble within an hour. A destroyed survey drone crushed like a soda can, its metal frame torn apart by something with massive claws. No burn marks, no bullet holes, just brute force. Something had played with it, then tossed it aside as if it meant nothing. Mark crouched beside the wreckage and examined the ground. Thick 3-toed prints led into the jungle ahead, and then vanished as if the creature had leapt into the air and disappeared. Drone frowned but said nothing. They moved forward carefully, and Mark's heart beat faster. Every time a branch snapped underfoot, he could feel the tension in his chest and in the hands of the others. They were all waiting for something, though none of them could say what. The sun began to dip behind the trees, and strange howls started rising from the east, long low wails that felt like they came from nowhere and everywhere at once. They decided to make camp on a ridge where the ground was clearer and set up perimeter lights and motion sensors. Mark was on second watch, and when his time came, he stood alone staring into the dark trees, rifle clutched tightly against his vest. An hour passed quietly, and Mark almost let himself relax. But then he heard it, a rustling not far from the edge of the clearing. Not the wind, not a small animal, but something deliberate. He clicked on his night vision and peered through the scope. Nothing was there, but he could feel it. Something was out there watching, waiting. A scream tore through the silence. It came from the southern edge of the camp. Mark turned and ran full speed as lights blinked red and alarm screamed. He found 2 team members down. One of them was missing completely, and the other lay torn open, chest ripped apart by something with blades or claws. There was blood everywhere, and the scent of iron hit him so hard he nearly gagged. Drone barked orders, and the team scrambled into position. Mark ran with them, flashlight bouncing over the trees. They caught a glimpse of something massive, black and covered in scales or armor. It moved so fast the trees shook, and then it was gone as if it had never been there. They found another body 20 meters away, this one half-eaten and dragged into the bushes. Mark saw the look in Roan's eyes. This was no random animal attack. This was calculated. It was hunting them. They spent the rest of the night in a tight circle, backs to each other, weapons aimed outward, and no one spoke. No one slept. When morning came, the jungle was calm again. Birds chirped as if nothing had happened. But people were missing, and the blood stains had already dried into the soil. Mark wandered a few steps from the group, needing a moment to breathe. He walked past a fallen log and froze, because there on the bark was a deep set of scratches, long and curved and too wide for any known predator. He placed his fingers against the grooves, and his hand barely covered half of one mark, whatever made. This was bigger than any animal listed in the database. Suddenly he heard breathing behind him, not his own, heavy and deep, something slow and chilling. He turned around, heart pounding, but saw nothing, just trees and vines and stillness. He started backing away slowly, step by step, rifle raised. Then he heard it, a growl, low and rumbling, and close, very close. His ears rang with fear as he realized it was not behind him anymore. It was above him. It tilted his head slowly, and through the green filtered sunlight he saw it perched silently on a branch. Far above, the creature was enormous, maybe 3 meters tall, with skin that looked like armored stone. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, and its mouth opened in a silent snarl, revealing rows of serrated teeth. It was studying him, not attacking, not afraid, just curious. Mark knew then that this was no animal. This was something intelligent, something ancient. It had let them land. It had let them explore, and now it was choosing when to strike. It took one shaky step backward, and the creature vanished in a blur of speed. A gust of wind from its motion hitting Mark's face like a slap. He stumbled and fell, But when he looked again, the branch was empty. Ran back to the other's breath caught in his throat, trying to explain what he saw, trying to make them understand that this was not a beast. This was a nightmare with a Mindro, and listened and nodded, and then marked a red zone on the map around their location. It was not just a search mission anymore, it was survival, and whatever ruled this jungle was not going to let them leave. Without a fight, the hunt had begun, and the predators were not just watching, they were planning. Mark barely slept that night, even though the sun had risen and the sky looked calm. His mind kept replaying the image of the creature on the tree branch, the way it stared at him, not like prey, but like a challenge. When the team gathered that morning, their numbers were fewer and their eyes hollow with fear. Captain Roan stood in front of them, his voice low and steady, but his face pale. They needed answers, and fast. The mission had changed from exploration to containment and survival. They could not call for extraction because the jungle was jamming their signals. Someone or something did not want them to leave. They started moving north toward the backup satellite relay that was buried in the hills according to the old maps. It was built during the first colony test runs decades ago. If they could reach it, maybe they could send a pulse burst to Earth Command and request full support. But reaching it meant crossing deeper into the hunting zone, and none of them felt ready for what waited there. Mark walked near the front, scanning every tree, every shadow. His scanner beeped now and then, but nothing solid came through. Just blurry shapes like ghosts moving in and out of reality ahead of him. The vines were getting thicker and the air more humid and strange. He felt as if the jungle itself was alive and pushing against them, trying to swallow them. Holly are past then too, and the sun was blocked entirely by the canopy when they reached a clearing and stopped to rest. Mark heard a sound again, that same slow breathing, but this time it was not from above, it was from the ground behind a rock. He signaled the team, and they surrounded the spot slowly, carefully, and then sprang forward, rifles raised. But what they found froze them in place. A creature lay there, wounded, massive and terrifying. Its armor cracked, its body bleeding dark green fluid. It was one of them, one of the predators, but this one was down, its breathing ragged, and its claws twitching. The team stepped back, but Mark stepped closer. He saw intelligence in its eyes, pain, confusion, maybe even regret. Captain Roan wanted to finish it there, but Mark stopped him and said they should study it, learn from it, maybe understand their enemy before they were wiped out. After a long moment, Roan nodded and they sedated the beast, strapped it to a transport board, and continued their march with extra caution. That night they reached the abandoned relay station, hidden beneath thick vines and broken metal walls. They secured the area, set up barricades, and powered up the core. Once the system began to hum, they all exhaled for the first time in days. But before they could rest, the creature they captured began to stir. Mark was the first to approach it, flashlight shining into its cracked visor, and he realized its eyes were fixed on him, not with hatred, but with something deeper. It growled softly, but not in threat. In response, as if trying to speak, he activated the translator module from the med kit and placed it near its throat. After a few seconds, the voice came out, distorted but clear. "And if you hunt us now," the creature said, "but you are new here, young soft. The jungle does not belong to you, it belongs to the old ones. We are its teeth, its law. You are introduced." Mark stared at it, trying to process what he was hearing. He asked why they attacked without warning, and the creature tilted its head slowly, as if confused by the question. "You bring fire and steel. You crush trees for roads. You wake the ground beasts and poison the rivers. This is your welcome, your warning." Mark stepped back and told Roan everything. The captain listened carefully and then made a decision. They would still call Earth Command, but not just for rescue. They would request full engagement. These creatures were not only apex predators, they were guardians of a world that humans had stumbled into without respect. Orkareth's signal was sent that night. A pulse of energy shot into orbit, a message wrapped in encryption and urgency. Then they waited for an answer, waited for dawn, waited for the next attack. Chao's Mark saw the wounded one break its bonds and rise. It turned to him, paused, and then charged into the jungle, away from the fight, as if fleeing, or maybe warning the others. Explosions tore through the clearing, screams filled the air, and smoke choked the sky. But humans fought back hard, using everything they had: thermal mines, sonic traps, laser turrets, and still it was not enough. The creatures were learning, adapting, dodging, and countering. Mark saw one leap over a barrier straight at him, and he ducked, rolled, and fired point blank into its chest. It fell twitching, but another one came right after. He felt his strength draining, but his will hardened. He would not go down, not today, not like this. Hours later, when the smoke cleared and silence returned, only half the team was left standing. The ground was covered in blood and ash, but the signal had been sent, and help was on the way. Mark sat near the broken relay station, blood on his hands and dirt in his mouth. He looked at the jungle and whispered to himself, "We are not just fighting monsters. We are rewriting the law of this world, and the predators were finally starting to see what humans could really do. Mark sat against the cold metal wall of the relay station, his breath slow but heavy. The jungle around them had fallen quiet again. But that silence was always a lie. It never meant peace, it only meant they were watching somewhere. Just beyond the trees, his fingers twitched as he reloaded his rifle, and his ears still rang with the sounds of the last attack: explosions, roars, screams, and that strange clicking noise the predators made when they were closing in on a kill. The survivors moved like shadows around the wreckage, rebuilding barricades, checking wounded and recovering gear. They had lost 3 more people, and now only 8 remained from the original team. Captain Roan stood in the center, staring at the jungle, his jaw locked and his hands clenched. They all knew the enemy would come again, and next time they might not leave anyone breathing unless something changed. Mark approached and laid out his idea. He had been thinking during the long night, piecing together fragments of what they knew about the creatures and the battle that just happened. They could not match them in strength or speed, and even their guns barely pierced their armor. But they had seen one thing that gave him hope. When one of the predators walked into the high-frequency sonic field, it had stumbled, disoriented for a few seconds, its balance gone, and its glow dimming. That weakness meant something could be used against them. Roan raised an eyebrow and listened as Mark explained a plan to use sonic pulses, heat signatures, and light manipulation to confuse and isolate them. It was not about firepower anymore. It was about outsmarting the predators, using their strengths against them, and forcing them into unfamiliar ground. Mark proposed setting a trap deep in the jungle, using their own wounded scent and sound to lure in a hunting pack. Once they were drawn in, the team would use portable emitters to disorient them, then strike when they were blind and off balance. It was risky, it was mad, but it was human, and that made it worth trying. By afternoon, they had moved to a narrow gorge covered in roots and shadow, a natural choke point perfect for an ambush. The emitters were planted hidden under leaves and rocks, their signal masked by thermal decoys. Mark placed scent tags soaked with predator blood and fresh human sweat along the trail leading into the trap. Then they waited, nerves tight, breaths low, weapons ready. As dusk fell, the jungle shifted again. Shadows moved without wind and the air grew colder. Mark spotted the first one, a tall, broad figure slipping through the trees, its armor darker now, like it had adjusted to their technology. Behind it came more, at least 5, maybe 6. Mark gave the silent signal and the emitters activated at once. A high-pitched wave of sound pulsed through the gorge, followed by bursts of red light and bursts of dry heat. The predators froze, staggered, their heads twitching violently, their glowing eyes flickering like damaged sensors. Mark and the others rose from their cover and opened fire, not randomly, but with precise bursts targeting joints, weak spots, and exposed vents. The creatures shrieked and charged, but they were slower, less accurate to fell. Almost immediately another tumbled down the ridge, its body twisting midair, the last to turn to retreat, but ran straight into the final trap. A thermal mine buried under their path exploded with a white flash, knocking them down. When the smoke cleared, 7 massive bodies lay sprawled across the gorge. One still twitched, gasping for breath. Mark approached, rifle raised, but the creature did not strike. Instead, it spoke in that same broken translator voice. "You evolved too fast." The creature said, "You twist the world to survive. That is why you are feared." Mark crouched beside it and asked if there were more. If the jungle would keep sending these monsters forever. The predator coughed and answered softly, "Are not monsters, we are guardians. We came long before you, but now we see you are not prey anymore." Eat died with a low hiss, its glowing eyes dimming to nothing. Mark stood slowly and looked around the gorge. The bodies of the fallen predators were proof that humanity could fight back, proof that even apex hunters could bleed when faced with something unpredictable, something desperate, something human. They dragged the corpses back to the station. Under cover of night, studying the remains, scientists would want data, armor composition, muscle density, nervous system layout. But what mattered more to Mark was the message this sent. They were not helpless, they could win. The next day, the satellite picked up a reply from Earth Command. Reinforcements were coming, but they would take time. Meanwhile, a full combat order had been issued. All colonies near Taros 9 were to be evacuated, and every available fleet was being armed with experimental tech. Humanity had faced threats before, but this was something new, something primal. The predators had ruled this jungle for centuries, maybe more, but now that dominance was being challenged not by brute force, but by adaptation, by creativity, by sheer will. Captain Roan gave Mark command of a new unit, the Ghost Thorns elite hunters, trained to use environment, sound, and deception to kill what others could not. Their mission was simple: track, eliminate, and learn. Every time they struck, they would get better, smarter, more deadly. Mark accepted without hesitation. His mind burned with images of friends lost of nights spent in terror and of the blue, glowing eyes that once looked down at him like he was nothing. Now it was their turn to feel hunted, to feel exposed as the ghost thorns prepared for their next mission. A sensor alarm triggered in the distance. They all turned to the monitor and saw something impossible, not just another patrol, but a wave, hundreds of them converging, moving as one, a swarm of apex predators, coming for revenge. Mark tightened the straps on his vest and picked up his rifle. He looked at his team and said, "This is no longer survival, this is war, and we are going to finish what we started." The jungle trembled as the swarm approached. Trees shook with each heavy step and the ground pulsed like a living drum. Mark stood on the ridge beside the broken relay station, staring at the endless line of creatures moving through the valley below. They were faster, more organized, no longer hunting alone, but in perfect formation. The time for small ambushes was over. This was war, and the ghost thorns were the first line of defense. Captain Roan had left hours ago on a risky flight to deliver data cores back to the orbital ship, and now the command rested on Mark's shoulders. The relay station had been reinforced using scrap from wrecked ships and predator armor converted into barriers and weapon plates. Drones buzzed in the air, while motion sensors lit the path of incoming movement. Mark's team stood silent, each one coated in thermal dust to hide their body heat, each one knowing they might not see another sunrise. They had studied the predator remains, broken apart, every detail. Their armor grew from living material hardened by age and emotion. Their strength came from internal energy spikes that surged when they sensed fear, and their eyes were not for vision but for reading intention. Humans had survived so far not because of strength, but because they could think around problems, create traps, change strategies. And now Mark was about to test their biggest idea, yet the plan was risky. It involved letting the predators break through the first line of defense and funneling them into a maze of mirrors and sound tunnels designed to split their pack and disorient their senses. The real fight would take place in the center, where sonic shock towers and heavy magnet fields would crush the enemies into submission. The first wave hit just after sunset. Sharp claws tore through vines and walls, armored feet pounded against the metal plating, and the roars of battle echoed for miles. Mark stood at the front, shooting flares to mark positions and drawing the creatures forward one by one. They entered the maze, chasing shadows and echoes. The ghost thorns moved like phantoms, using the confusion to strike fast and vanish. But the predators were learning to each one that fell was replaced by another one faster and smarter. They adapted to the sound fields. They began targeting the generators and baiting humans into traps. Mark lost 3 of his best fighters in the first hour and another 2 while rescuing the wounded. He felt the pressure tightening in his chest. Every second brought more risk, more blood, more silence. Then came the worst moment. A low signal cracked through the calms, a warning from a sensor. Near the south flank, something large was moving underground. It was not part of the main swarm. It was different, bigger, older. Mark raced toward the signal, leaving the command zone behind. And as he reached the sensor site, he felt the earth shift beneath his feet. Then it rose from the ground, emerged a creature twice the size of the others. Its body covered in old scars and fused plates, its arms like stone columns, and its breath slow and deep like the wind through a cave. Mark barely had time to move before it lunged, crashing through trees and metal like paper. He rolled and fired, but the bullets bounced uselessly off its chest. The beast grabbed him and slammed him into the ground, its glowing eyes staring down as if examining him. As if disappointed, it growled a word in a voice that shook the soil. Weak beaver, it could crush him. A high-energy blast struck its back. The relay tower had activated auto-defense mode, and the laser turret fired again and again until the monster dropped him and turned toward the heat source. Mark crawled away, bleeding, coughing, and pulled out his emergency detonator. With one last breath, he triggered the southern charge, blowing the monster backward into a magnetic trap field. Electric bolts chained the creature to the ground for a moment, just enough time for the ghost thorns to arrive and unleash everything they had: grenades, plasma charges, focused sound bursts, and chemical rounds. The monster screamed, a sound that cracked tree trunks and drove birds into the air. Then it collapsed and the jungle fell still again. Back at the base, Mark was treated for broken ribs and internal bruises, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. They had survived the impossible. They had killed something that was once considered immortal, and now they knew the truth. Even the strongest predators could fall if struck in the right place with the right heartbeat. The victory cost them half. The ghost thorns were gone, and the defenses were nearly ruined. As they repaired what they could, Mark studied the remains of the massive creature and found something buried in its armor, a small crystal cube marked with symbols. Not human, not predator, but ancient. He held it up and a projection flickered to life, showing galaxies, stars, and other predator hives spread across systems. Far beyond Taros Ninethys was not a single planet threat, this was a network, an empire of predators, spanning light years, and now humanity had made its presence known. The cube ended with a final image, the face of a creature even larger, cloaked in shadow, with eyes burning like suns, and behind it hundreds of hives awakening. Mark stood silent, his hand closing around the cube and his thoughts racing. The jungle fight was just the beginning, the storm was coming and humanity had just drawn the first blood. He looked at the sky and whispered a promise, not of fear but of challenge. "AO called us weak, but now you know what humans really read." The fire had not gone out in Mark's chest even as the pain wrapped his ribs and the blood dried on his armor. The storm of battle had passed, but the jungle remained restless, as if the planet itself was deciding what to do with the survivors. The ghost thorns worked silently, their faces numb, their hands steady, rebuilding turrets, sealing walls, and dragging bodies, both human and predator, to one side of the clearing, a line between who fell and who endured. The crystal cube Mark had found now pulsed faintly in his pocket, and every time he touched it a whisper curled through his mind, not a voice, but an instinct, an echo of something vast and terrible awakening beyond the stars. The next morning brought no sunlight, the sky was covered in clouds, black and moving fast, and a strange pressure filled the air. Mark stood at the center of the command zone, staring into the trees, waiting. He knew something was coming, not another swarm, not a beast, but something older, something that moved without being seen. He had barely spoken a word since the last battle, but now he called his team together and showed them the cube. He explained what he had seen, what it meant, and the look in their eyes shifted from fear to fear. These things had ruled for centuries, feeding on fear and blood and silence, but now they had been wounded by something they never expected, a species that refused to stay down, that turned every death into a lesson, every scar into a weapon. And now the predators knew humans were no longer prey, they were predators too. But Mark had a new theory, something that twisted everything they thought. They understood the cube had shown him how the enemy sensed emotions, not just fear, but rage, courage, grief. The stronger the feeling, the clearer they saw their target. It was not just instinct, it was a system, a way to track the strongest threat and destroy it first. And that gave Mark an idea. What if they became invisible, not physically, but emotionally? What if they blocked every signal, turned their emotions into stone? Every ghost thorn received a neural filter injected behind the ear, built from scavenged parts and alien tech. The device would suppress fear, grief, panic, every spike that made the predators lock on. Instead they would feel nothing, walk like shadows, act like ghosts, and strike without warning. They tested the theory. That night Mark walked alone into the jungle, no light, no weapon, just the filter in his neck and the courage in his spine. The creatures watched him, he could feel them, but they did not move, their heads tilted as if confused, sniffing the air, trying to read him. But he was blank, silent, unreadable, a ghost among monsters. And then he moved fast, throwing a flare high into the sky and diving behind a fallen tree. The light snapped their senses back online, and his team hit them with a rain of sonic fire and magnetic spears. 3 went down instantly, and the 4th ran into a false cliff lined with shaped charges. The trap worked again and again. Over the next 2 days the jungle became a graveyard of fallen beasts and twisted vines. The ghost thorns left marks on every tree, burned symbols in the dirt, warnings written in every language. The predators understood this world was changing, and the humans had made it their ambit just when they thought they were winning. The earth shook again, and this time it was not the steps of a creature or the fall of a tree. It was the signal tower flashing red, the orbital array picking up a heat spike in the planet core, something massive, something not natural, a tunnel opening below the surface where no human had ever gone. Mark watched the readings, his hands cold, his breath locked. It was not over, it was never over. The cube glowed again, showing a final image, not of war or stars, but of a single predator kneeling before a massive throne, carved into a wall of bone and crystal. The throne was empty, and the figure bowed its head in silence. Mark knew what it meant. The queen was coming, the one who ruled them all, not just with strength but with thought and vision and hunger, the real apex predator. And she was not coming for territory or revenge, she was coming for Mark, because now he was a symbol. Now he was the one thing that could not be ignored. Gathered his team, spoke without raising his voice, told them what was waiting underground, and asked for volunteers. Every hand rose, every soldier stood, not because they were fearless, but because they were done running. They had become something new, not prey, not ghosts, but legends. As they prepared to descend into the dark tunnels below the jungle, a voice crackled through the relay station, an open channel from deep underground, distorted, layered, and cold. You woke the old blood, now you will see what real power is. Mark stared into the hole cut into the earth and stepped forward without looking back. This was not just survival anymore. This was the beginning of the end. Descent into the earth was not quiet. The walls groaned like old Bones, the deeper they moved, the hotter the air became, and the more the jungle sounds above faded into silence. Mark led the way, his rifle slung across his back, his eyes fixed on the tunnel ahead. Behind him, the ghost thorns followed their boots, pressing into ancient stone, their bodies surrounded by dim green light. From their wrist pads, every step they took carried the weight of fallen friends' broken promises, and a growing fire that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with becoming something unstoppable. The tunnels were carved by something alive. The walls pulsed faintly like veins, and strange symbols glowed in the dark, not written by tools, but etched by energy. The same language that covered the cube now marked every turn, every path, until they entered a chamber so vast it swallowed their light, and returned only stillness. There in the center was the queen. She stood taller than anything. They had faced her body, a sculpture of bone and black metal, her limbs long and spiked, her face hidden behind a mask that seemed to shimmer with thought, her eyes not glowing, but empty voids pulling everything in around them. Mark froze, not from fear, but from the strange calm that settled over him. The filter in his neck buzzed, warning of a surge in emotional response, but he ignored it. This moment was real, and he wanted to feel all of it. The queen spoke, not with sound but with presence. Her words pressed into their minds, layered with memories and pain. She showed them the birth of her hive, the wars she survived, the civilizations she had ended, and the humans she had watched from afar. She did not hate them, she did not fear them, she was simply disappointed that they refused to kneel. Mark stepped forward and removed the cube from his pocket, holding it high. The queen tilted her head, and for the first time her mask cracked slightly, revealing a mouth full of teeth and hunger. She lunged, and the fight began. Ghost thorns scattered as the chamber lit with weapon fire and sonic bursts. But nothing slowed her, not at first. She moved like smoke and fire, striking down two soldiers with one sweep of her claws and melting another with a scream that shattered helmets. Mark rolled under her second strike, sliding toward the control panel they had planted hours. Aga hit the trigger, and the chamber roared to life as the magnetic field slammed down from the ceiling, locking the queen in place. For a moment her armor sparked and her body shook, but she broke free seconds later, ripping cables from the walls and sending sparks in every direction. Mark barely avoided the strike that followed, tumbling over broken stone and landing near the altar at the far end of the room. In the altar sat a sphere glowing red hot, pulsing with power, the source of the hive energy, the beacon that called the others. Mark grabbed it even as it burned into his skin and turned to face the queen. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither moved. The world around them glowed. Then Mark did something no human would ever do: stab the burning sphere into his own chest. Pain exploded through his body as the energy tore through his veins. His screams echoed through the chamber as his armor melted and his eyes turned white. Light exploded from him, washing over the queen and the walls and the floor. Everything the hive had built began to shake as the energy unraveled its roots. Queen screamed and lunged again, but Mark caught her hand in his and held it tight. The energy surged from him into her, and for the first time in her endless life she stumbled, not because of injury, but because of fear. Real fear. You wanted to know why we survive, Mark whispered, his voice echoing with 100 voices now. Because we never stop. Because we become what we have to. Because we are not just humans, we are hope, we are hate, we are memory, and we are the storm. With one final burst of energy he drove the queen backward and into the altar, shattering it into dust. The room collapsed around them as the hive began to die, walls crumbling, tunnels falling. The ghost thorns pulled back, dragging Mark's body with them as alarms screamed and stone cracked. The escape seconds before the ground above exploded, sending a tower of ash and fire into the jungle. The hive was gone, the queen was gone, and in the silence that followed, the planet itself seemed to sigh. Mark awoke days later aboard a med ship in orbit, his chest wrapped in reinforced fiber, his eyes still glowing faintly from the energy he absorbed. The doctors called it a miracle, the command called it a victory, but Mark knew better. It was a warning. A line crossed, a message sent. Earth command declared, Taros 9 cleared and colonization resumed. But the cube was sealed in a vault, and Mark was given one choice: return to Earth and rest, or lead the next mission to the next hive in the next star system. He stood slowly, pain still echoing in his bones, and looked out the window at the stars. "I am not done," he said. Mark stood on the bridge of the warship named Shadow Crest, watching the stars shift through the reinforced glass. His hands rested on the console, his breathing steady, but every heartbeat carried weight, more than memory, more than pain. It carried purpose. Since the battle on Taros 9 he had changed, not just in body, but in mind. The energy he took from the queen was still inside him, humming just below the skin, reminding him every moment that he had touched something ancient and livid. Ghost thorns were with him again, no longer just soldiers but symbols of what humanity could Become every member had scars not just from battle, but from choices they had made lines. They had crossed for something greater, and now Earth Command had given them one final mission. A system far beyond the known colonies had gone dark. Probes vanished and satellites refused to respond. Scans picked up massive heat signatures and strange pulses of emotion that echoed across space like the hum of a forgotten war. It was not a question anymore. The hives were not just local, they were spread across the stars, a hidden empire waiting to wacky. As the ship moved closer to the target world, the signals grew louder, not in sound, but in feeling. Grief, anger, hunger, loss, waves of sorrow so deep they made the crew dream of things they had never seen. Mark stared at the transmission logs, knowing what it meant. The queen they had faced was not the first and not the last, and now the others had taken notice. He landed on the surface of the new planet at dusk. The terrain was different, cracked red stone, vast canyons, boiling air, and ash clouds. Nothing green, nothing soft. The silence was sharp like blades against the skin. The ghost thorns moved in formation, scanning the horizon as strange shapes shifted in the dust. Tall figures watching from the cliffs, just far enough to stay hidden, but close enough to remind them that they were not alone. This world was not like Taros 9. It was not guarded, it was empty, hollow, like something had already happened and they were walking through the aftermath. Then they found the first signs. Twisted machines wrapped in bone, fields of armor, pieces fused into the ground, and massive footprints trailing off into caverns where the wind refused to blow. Mark knelt beside one of the prints and touched the center. His vision blurred and he saw flashes, not memories, but visions of hives falling, stars burning, and creatures fleeing not from humans, but from something else, something bigger. At the edge of the main valley they found a monolith, carved from black stone and lined with ancient runes. Mark stepped forward and pressed the cube into its surface. The runes lit up and the monolith split, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into the dark. The ghost thorns followed without hesitation, weapons ready, hearts steady. Deep below the surface they entered a hall filled with stasis pods, each one containing a different form of predator, warriors, beasts, hybrids, all frozen, all waiting. And at the far end was a throne much like the one shown in the projection, only now it was broken, cracked down the center, as if whatever ruled here had abandoned it or been destroyed long. Agamark stepped toward it and placed his hand on the stone. The energy from the cube surged through him and the room lit up with holograms of past battles, old galaxies, ancient leaders, and one final image, a map showing hundreds of worlds, with hives dormant, sealed, hidden, some close, some impossibly far, and in the center a red world marked with the symbol of war. It pulsed like a heart, and then the vision ended. It turned to his team and said only one word: prepare. They understood without needing explanation. This was not the final hive, it was only a warning, a message that the real war was still to come. As they exited the chamber the ground shook, and the sky above cracked open. A massive ship descending through the clouds, its hull covered in predator symbols, its weapons glowing with energy. A voice echoed across the valley, deep, mechanical and ancient: you were never meant to find us, but now that you have, the game changes. Mark raised his weapon, and the ghost thorns took position surrounding the monolith. As the predator ship landed, the ramp lowered and a single figure stepped out. Not a queen, not a beast, but something different, something older, tall and robed, eyes dim and tired, a survivor of something greater. It looked at Mark and spoke in a quiet voice: you are not your enemy, but we are not your ally. You have become something we once were, and that makes you dangerous. What you choose next will decide the fate of more than just your kin. Mark stepped forward, his boots cracking the dust, his rifle still in hand, and the fire inside him brighter than ever. He did not speak like a soldier or a hero, he spoke like a human. Then give us your truth or face our future. The wind howled through the canyon as the stars above shimmered, and for the first time in history, two apex species stood face to face, not as predator and prey, but as survivors of their own evolution. Humanity had not just killed the predators, they had become something more, and the galaxy was watching now, waiting to see what they would become next. Mark stood alone at the edge of the cliff, the wind tearing through his jacket, the shattered world below him glowing with embers. The sky was dark, but not empty. Stars blinked above like silent eyes, watching, waiting, remembering everything that had happened since Taros 9, since the first growl in the jungle and the first blood on his hands. He had walked through fire, seeing death, stared into the void of ancient minds, and returned not broken, but reborn. Ghost thorns were scattered now, some healing, some rebuilding, others leading new teams across new frontiers. The predator war had changed them, not just physically, but deep in the soul. They had faced creatures born from terror, masters of fear, rulers of forgotten stars, and they had endured not because they were stronger, but because they refused to be harassed. In the weeks that followed the standoff on the Red World, Earth Command received a transmission from the Predator survivors, not of surrender and not of alliance, but of acknowledgement, a message carved in fire across a dead moon. A single phrase in every known language: "You are now part of the balance." Mark had read it over and over, knowing it was not a threat, not a promise, but a truth. The Predators would no longer hunt them, because they could no longer afford to. The humans had done what no other race had managed. They had killed the apex, and in doing so taken their place in the great chamber. With that power came weight, responsibility, danger, because now every eye in the galaxy turned toward Earth, toward the scattered colonies, toward the homeworld of the species that rose from weakness and became legend, not through domination but through resilience, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will to risk. Walked back toward the camp, a small outpost on the edge of the galaxy where soldiers trained in silence, where leaders studied old battle logs, where engineers fused Predator tech with human imagination, crafting tools not for control but for survival and exploration. The cube still pulsed faintly in his pocket, a reminder of the Queen, of the throne, of the fire, of the blood, and of the voice that had told him he was weak. He smiled, not in pride, but in defiance, because the truth was never about strength. It was about the choice to fight when the fight seemed impossibly. As he sat near the edge of the landing platform, a ship soared into the sky, heading toward another unknown system, another forgotten hive, another lost piece of the puzzle. And he knew others would follow, not as conquerors, but as witnesses, and if needed as warriors. A young recruit approached him, her face sharp, her eyes burning with the same fire he once carried. She asked if the stories were true, if he really saw the Queen, if he really died and came back. Looked at her and nodded once, not as a hero, but as someone who had simply chosen not to fall. And then he handed her the cubite. "Is yours now," he said. "Just remember, we do not run, we do not bow, we do not forget us." She walked away holding the weight of legends. Mark leaned back against the cold steel and looked up one last time into the vast night. The galaxy had changed because humans refused to break, and now they would shape the future, not because they were invited, but because they earned their place. The end.